Did you know you can add rich tones and depth to your prints with one simple household ingredient? Well, I'm doing a little experiment here where I tone, more accurately stain my prints with tea. And this might just be one of the cheapest darkroom experiments I've ever done. That is until I started gold toning my prints
and threw that idea straight out the window.
I do feel like for some images, tinting and staining the base or the emulsion of your prints can give it a really, really lovely look. And it even can give it kind of a retro and vintage feel to it. So I was playing around with this scan of an image I shot while I was recently down in Chicago. And I've kind of grown to really enjoy doing this because it can give me a lot of direction in how I want to take a print. So this is one area of digital scanning and photography that I've really come to love in my workflow. And I have this sort of pseudo lith print preset that I made, and it really gives me an idea of what the split tone and the highlights will look like. And when I was looking at this image with that preset applied, it occurred to me that I might be able to get something very similar to this with staining the base, specifically staining the base with tea. So this prompted me to set up this little experiment and hence this video. So when I started doing this, the first thing I decided that I would print this image at a higher contrast. There wasn't any detail. It was a clear blue sky, and the sky was already kind of blown out the way I shot the image. So there wasn't any detail in the sky, so I wasn't concerned about that. So I figured I would just increase the contrast and then kind of stain the highlights, and that would reduce that contrast a little bit, but still give it a lot of punch in the shadows and in the buildings. So then once I had the exposure and the development and all that figured out, I made 5 exact copies of this image. So next, I fully toned one of the prints in a gold chloride toning bath. And the reason I did this is because the gold chloride toner coats the silver and it makes it cooler, and it can even go into the blues. But in this case, with a neutral tone paper like home-brewed, which I was using, it will just kind of cool it off. So what I'm going for here is kind of a split, the cold image on a warmer base. And that should give me that kind of pseudo lith split kind of image with that depth that I'm looking for. And as expected, the home-brewed did not go overly blue, but it did cool off quite nicely as expected. And I do like the straight print just as it is. And now onto the tea. According to Tim Rudman's toning book, highly recommended, the cheapest black tea apparently is supposed to work the best. Now, I don't know anything about tea. I grabbed Earl Grey. It said black tea on it, but I'm more of a coffee guy. And then I also wanted to shift more of the tea color to the pinks if I could. And now my wife does have a ton of tea at home, loose tea. And I know that if we ever use the hibiscus, it turns the tea very rosy red. And my thought is that if I put some hibiscus in that, it's gonna shift it to the pinks, hopefully. So I decided I would throw some hibiscus in the mix as well. So what I did to brew the tea, I used 4 of the tea bags and then 2 tablespoons of loose hibiscus into a quart jar. And I brewed it for 10 minutes. Then I pulled the tea bags and the hibiscus out and just let it cool at room temperature. It was still slightly warm when I used it. The next thing I did was I cut one of the prints into 3 pieces. And this will allow me to test some initial times with that one print, and then I can kind of put them back together and see a general area of which one I like. And I toned those 3 at 1.5 minutes, 3 minutes, and 6 minutes. After I toned them, I gave them a real wash. I wanted to see if a full wash would kind of eliminate any of the stain, so I didn't want any surprises when I did my final one. So I gave them a real full wash, dried them, and evaluated them. So I really liked the strip at 1.5 minutes and 3 minutes, but ultimately decided I was gonna try a full print with a 2-minute stain and then a full print with a 4-minute stain. So I stained those next, washed them again, and evaluated them. Overall, after looking at these, I like the subtlety of the 2-minute print the best. So next I took the gold toned print and I stained it or toned it in the tea for 2 minutes as well. So this left me with one image that was just a print unstained as my control, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, and then another one that is fully gold toned for 2 minutes. And so here are the results. I'm hoping you can see the subtleties and the differences between these. It can be a little bit difficult to see them on a video, especially up on YouTube, but I'm absolutely doing my best to try and show you the differences. I do really quite like the gold toned and tea stained print. It is giving me that look I'm after, the kind of colder image tone on a stained warm base. I like the contrast and depth you get when doing this, and it does have that kind of lithe print look in a way, though not the grainy shadows, but it has that split tone going for it, and I really, really like it. And it's honestly more easy to control than a lithe print, so it's got that going for it as well. I am quite excited to trim this and mount it to see how it will look matted and mounted and presented properly. One thing that I've noticed, and I noticed this in the past too, if you don't leave a border, the tea will definitely bleed in on any areas where the paper was cut. Where I trimmed it in 3, you can see the tea kind of bleeds in. So you want to make sure you leave yourself enough border to make sure that the stain is even in the actual print area. So I'm really, really happy with the results of my little staining experiment. I think this can give you a really, really cool creative look to your prints. It can even go into the retro and very vintage looks. And what it actually does, if you do it subtly, it will give you the look of kind of some of the warm tone paper bases. And some of the older papers had even more of that ivory cream base to them. Not so much anymore, but like the Foamatone, that has a much creamier base. And you can get this to kind of resemble that in a much cheaper way if you want to. So overall, it's definitely a very, very cool creative way. Something that I would recommend you play around with. It's easy, it's cheap to do, and for the right image, it does look really, really cool. So let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this process and this experiment. And have you ever tried staining your prints with anything other than tea, maybe coffee, or anything similar? And if you need help getting proper print exposure and contrast in your darkroom prints, you're gonna wanna check out this video right here.